Hello and welcome to the Divine Renovation podcast, where we seek to inspire and equip you to bring your parish from maintenance to mission. My name's Dan, and I've got three awesome people with me today. Ron Huntley, Director of Coaching at Divine Renovation. Good to see you.
Good to be here, Dan.
Father James Mallon, the founder, chair of Divine Renovation. My buddy. Good to see you.
It's good to be here, Dan.
And a special guest joining us from Missouri for this episode, Melanie Smollen. It is such a pleasure to be with you.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
So Melanie, we brought you on because we heard about what you were up to, and we thought it was really cool. Now, on last week's podcast, we talked a little bit about what it's like to be a person going into a church, but I think you have a particular level of experience in this category. So you're the founder and president of Faith Perceptions. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And what exactly does Faith Perceptions do?
So Faith Perceptions is a consulting firm for churches and faith-based organizations. And our flagship program, probably what we're most well known for, is our mystery guest program. And what that entails is when we work with a church, we find people who are not regularly attending church anywhere to go in as first-time guests, visit the church, and then share feedback, unbiased, honest feedback about their experience.
Everyone here is laughing right now.
We both got our heads in our hands.
Oh gosh, that is crazy.
It must take a lot of guts to sign up for you to work with you guys. That's like the church that actually would agree to work with you guys, to go through this, to have that evaluation. Oh boy, we're gonna hear things that are gonna be very challenging to us.
You know, that's so true. And I remember one pastor said it perfectly. He just said, "Listen, I know we're going to hear some things that aren't easy to hear." He's like, "But we're at the point where we just need to hear them." And that's really for the churches that we worked with, I mean, that is their posture is no, will it be easy? Maybe not. But I would say that they don't just hear things that are hard to hear. They also hear things that are great. We do work with a lot of churches that do the mystery guest program, that they don't just learn about their blind spots. They're also hearing things about, just kind of strengths and where they're doing a great job in making people feel welcome. So there's some good things too. I mean, we've had tons. We've sent 10,000 mystery guests now since we started in churches all across the United States of all different Christian faiths.
That is amazing.
The beauty is they get to be anonymous. I think that's part of it. Also, it helps that we pay them. So, it's actual market research. We pay them to go into the church and to share what their experience is. And the fact that they get to be anonymous is very helpful because they know that the church isn't going to know who they are and that they can share honest feedback about what it was like for them when they came. And they're not going to have anybody coming up to them or identifying them in that way.
What inspired you to start this up as a business? I mean, there's got to be something that happened that inspired you to start this journey off.
There's several things. I would boil it down to two things. One, my husband's in ministry. We've got, a large church. We see people come. And we see people not come back. And while, and I think this is true for any church, while we know there's a percentage of people that come and they don't come back because of just where they're at in life, right? Mm-hmm. It's not because maybe they didn't feel unwelcome. It's just sometimes people just reject the church and they reject the whole idea of a relationship with God. So that's one. The other reason I think is that there are people that don't come back because they just feel plain out rejected by the church. And so my heart behind this, when we weren't seeing people coming back, is I'm like, it's one thing if they reject God. It's a whole other thing if they leave because they feel rejected by us. I'm like, that's something that we can do something about. And that's something I want to do something about. And then the second reason for starting this is I've always had a heart for making people feel welcome. I grew up unchurched almost all through my younger years into my 20s. And it really wasn't until I was almost 30 years old and had just, some difficult things going on in my life where I began to explore the idea of, what would it be like to be a part of church and to have a relationship with Christ. And I can remember the experiences growing up that kind of prevented me from wanting to go back to church. And what I've said to many people is it's not necessarily that anybody in the church set out to make me not feel welcome or reject me. It was more that I didn't understand what was happening. I was kind of confused about, just everything that would happen. And then this is especially true, for the Catholic Church. And so many people don't know what's going on or how to participate or even how to learn about it and connect with somebody. And then there were often experiences where I'd come in and just no one would talk to me. And again, it wasn't that I think they saw me and said, we're not going to talk to her. It's just simply they get busy with one another and with their family and their kids. And so that was the sort of thing that prevented me from going so long. And I thought, those are things we can do something about. So those were a couple of things really that were rolling around in my head when this all started, a decade ago.
So 1 decade, that's a long journey. Can you help me understand the name, Faith Perceptions? What's the origin of that? It's an interesting name for the organization.
We rolled around a lot of different names, but really this is about not just what people perceive in regards to the church itself, but just faith itself. And so we thought that it would be, the perfect name to describe, faith perceptions in regards to, what people think of us, because, the very people we're trying to reach are the people in the margins, that are out there, not connected anywhere. And so what do they think of us? And often what they think of us, plays a huge role in them even becoming a part of or learning more or taking next steps in the church. And so that's kind of where that came from. Our
ministry, we coach and journey and equip Catholic parishes. I mean, our goal is to come alongside Catholic parishes as they embrace this desire to be missional. But your work, is it focused on the Catholic Church alone, or are you working across different traditions?
So yes, primarily our work has been with Protestant churches, but in the last 3 years, we've done more work with Catholic churches. And I have to say, I have a real passion for that. And one of the main reasons is some of my closest friends are Catholic. And I know the heartburn they have around people not feeling connected and the struggle. And I have a heart for that too, because I believe that God, there are all kinds of churches, Christian churches, and meant to reach people. And, I think one of the two barriers that I've seen in all of the work I've done with the Catholic Church is that people are not coming back for very simple reasons. One, nobody talks to them, and two, they have no idea what's going on. It's not about theology, which is that. They don't even get to that. And so for my Catholic brothers and sisters, I'm like, we can prevent that. We can make a difference in that. We're not changing what we believe, but we can change the way we communicate it to people so that they can be a part of that.
So, Father James, have you experienced, is that sort of the common barrier that you think is in existence for the Catholic Church? It's that when people show up, those who are unchurched or unconnected to the Catholic Church, and they show up on Sunday, what are the primary struggles on that first encounter that you would see?
Well, I think we've got to acknowledge that for many people, the decision to actually show up at any kind of church at all is, especially if it's not part of what you do, is absolutely enormous. It's huge. And most people probably have done a lot of soul searching or research. They've gone online. If you have something that's online, they've looked at it. They've been on your website, and they've already journeyed quite a bit. So that they're taking the next step, and to open that door and to walk in. It's said that within, I think, the first minute of walking into the church, people have, in a sense, have made up their minds, because it's that first impression. Am I going to be welcomed? Is this going to be scary? Is this a safe place? So I think hospitality and welcoming, even a smile, can cover a multitude of sins, a multitude of sins of omission. But often that's sadly the last thing that people experience when they walk into a church. I mean, I think of the traditional usher role that we used to have. I mean, part of the job description, when you had to be a grumpy old man and who would kind of growl at people. That was just because our experience of Mass really traditionally was, this is communal private prayer. Like, we come here together communally, but the dynamic is private, personal prayer. So when you come into the church, you ought to be already praying. So that's why it's to be silent. And because everyone knew this is what you were supposed to do. The usher, the traditional role of an usher, was more of a policeman. Who, if you would even dare to make eye contact with someone or act as if this was meant to be a communal experience, they would shut you down. And that's what it was 40, 50 years ago. So we still have that kind of culture that's there. Whereas the Eucharist, it's essentially communal prayer, And there are times of intimacy with the Lord. We have one-on-one, but that's part of of where we find ourselves. And many of even the architecture of our churches are designed so that there is no vestibule area. There's no foyer. As soon as you step into the church, you are in the nave. You're in that sacred space. And so our churches weren't even designed for that. I think it's Winston Churchill who said, before they're built, we design our churches, and after they're built, they design us.
So help me understand, Melanie, because you live this on a day-to-day basis. Why is it so important that churches, that they make welcoming a priority?
If you just think about it in secular terms, if you go into any restaurant, you go into any bookstore or any business, and you walk in and you don't feel welcome, I mean, what's the likelihood of you returning to that? And how much more important is the work we're doing at the church? So it just in terms of importance, I mean, when somebody walks into a church for the first time, you are representing God to them. And when they don't feel welcome, then therefore they might not feel welcome by God. And so how important is that? I think it's hugely important. I think it's baseline number one, very important that people come in, no matter where they're at in life or what they're coming in for, or if they've been away or they grew up in the church and fell out of regularly attending, no matter where they're at in life, they should come in and always feel that they've come home.
It's fundamentally a dimension of love. I mean, Jesus himself said, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. This is one of the core commandments that the Lord gives us. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I think of the letter to the Hebrews that, speaking about welcoming people, that reminds us that many have welcomed angels unawares. Like, you don't know who it is that you're actually but welcoming. And even the words of Saint Benedict in his famous rule, so this rule of the Christian life that impacted the church for centuries, he says very, very plainly in his rule that the guest is Christ. Like, when we welcome a guest, we welcome Jesus himself, that we are to honor guests as Jesus. Now, imagine a gathering of a church on Sunday morning and Jesus actually walked through the door. Like he's returned. He walks through the door and he got a grunt from a grumpy usher and told to and ignored. I mean, we would flip out, right? We would flip out. And yet the guest who comes into our midst, we welcome him. He said, whatsoever you do to the least of these, you do unto me. Amen. So that's another part of it as well, is that we're to, that's an extension of love, of the command to love. And yet we just do such a bad job of it.
Melanie, help me understand. What are some of the stories or experiences, some of your secret shoppers? Is that what we call them? Is it a secret mystery churchgoers? What's the term we call them?
We call them mystery guests.
Okay.
I like to use the word or the term guests because I don't want to consider them visitors. And so, a guest is somebody that you look forward to having come, and they're not an intruder, and they're not also temporary, right? Visitors are temporary, but a guest is somebody welcome into your home, and you hope that they aren't temporary. So that's the whole reason for that term. But they're mystery guests. So as far as some of the stories, well, I'll tell you, I mean, really, one of the most recent stories that prompted me to start looking at you guys and just looking at different ministries that help Catholic parishes. As I mentioned, we've done work with Catholic parishes around the country. And one of the recent churches that we worked with asked us to help them, see how welcoming they were. And so we sent, over a 3 to 4 month period, 16 different first-time guests to their church. Some were lapsed Catholic, some were have never been Catholic, maybe were Protestant. But the thing that they had in common, the 16 guests, is that they were not regularly attending church anywhere. So they just weren't connected, period. So we sent them to different masses, and we did the weekend masses because that's really any church, Protestant or Catholic, that's when you're likely to see a first-time guest, not during the weekday masses. And so at the conclusion of that study, what I found is that, and this isn't the first time I've seen it, but this really kind of hit home and jarred me a bit when I looked at it, is of the 16 guests that came back, one of the questions we asked them is, would you come back again? Would you return and revisit this parish again? And their answer was no. All 16 said they would not return. And when we asked them why, what were the reasons for not returning, the number one reason was they didn't feel welcome, really, because it boiled down to the fact that nobody spoke to them. They walked in to the parish. There were no bulletins like you would typically see. There was no information anywhere. There was no greeters. It was quiet. Father talked about that a minute ago. It's just quiet. It's a time of communing and intimacy. But for somebody who's on the outside, they don't understand that. So they think there's just nobody talking to them. Right. And not only was there no one talking to them before the Mass, no one, they got up after the Mass, and it's just like, everybody rushes out the door, or to who they know or whatnot. And so no one talked to them afterwards. And then, to boot, there's just zero information to help somebody who did maybe want to take next steps be able to do so. It's very insider. Yes. So for this parish, one of the things we presented the findings to the parish council, and they were startled, obviously, by that.
Could you imagine that meeting? Can you imagine?
And they just said, we've been here for 100+ years, and just the church has existed in this area forever, and all we're reaching are the same people, right. Catholics who, that's the evangelization. That's how they evangelize. And the same is true for Protestants, by the way. We think people will marry into the faith, or they'll have more kids, and that's how we're going to reach people. But they were startled by it, and they just said, "This is not okay. This is not okay. We have to change this." And they said, and this isn't just a hospitality problem. They said, this is a culture problem. That's right. And they said, we have to start there. That's got to be ground zero for us, that we've got to impact the culture before we just start throwing greeters up there and trying to get ushers and get friendly people. And so, so a really cool story about them is they have developed leadership. Core value teams. They are working very hard at creating these teams, but also impacting the culture through book studies and through discussions and through the homily and the value of people and the value of reaching out to people, not just the ones that come in the door, but really taking a deeper dive and doing like a ministry audit. Like, how do we actually reach people? We do a lot of transactional outreach, right? Where it's really easy for churches to cock their wallets and give to something, but not to develop relationships with people, which is the very thing that they're needing. And so, the success for me in this is, yes, they're creating hospitality in their church and welcoming, which is awesome, but they're also really taking a deeper dive on how do we improve and impact and grow as a body. Mm-hmm. But also in how we reach other people. So how do we connect and get closer and then reach other people in a more missional way versus the transactional way we've typically done it, which is to, throw money at it. What
surprises me about the story, and Ron, I just think, so they actually were brave enough to invite Melanie and her team in. Like they were already, like, they had a mindset of wanting this to matter, and 0 out of 16. Like I'm feeling the weight of that.
And that often means as well, the people who are proactive in this and engaging ministries like ours are usually better than average, because at least it's on their radar.
Yeah.
And yet, when you have someone come in from the outside, it can be quite scary what it reveals.
It doesn't surprise me at all, to be honest with you. And you know what I love about, we just came back from England recently and went to a Stephen Langridge church in Richmond. And I was going in the side door, and David caught me. He said, no, I want you to go in the front door, get the full experience. And sure enough, and they've only been in the network for a year, and hospitality was spectacular. But the thing that moved me the most was I sat by myself. Like, there was people around me, but I was, you leave enough space because you're not right up against somebody when you have a pew. And anyway, when I was leaving, I decided to leave out the side aisle, and I turned and started walking. Well, the woman must have stepped over her husband in a hurry and ran down the aisle and tapped me on the shoulder. And she said, "Hi, are you new? Are you visiting?" And she went way out of her way to talk to me. And I told her I was from Canada, and she just, "I'm so glad you're here. I hope you enjoyed the worship." And she was just so And she wasn't a staff person. That was just that was just a lady in the pew. She was much older than me, and just went way out of her way because she saw something.
Well, this goes to what Melanie was saying, right? Because I mean, the question of, it's not about so much the tactic of hospitality and making sure you've got people standing, but it's the culture. And so like that's part of what we try and help parishes accomplish, is to shift the culture, right, Ron?
And one of the things that is so important to us, and that's why we use Alpha as a tool to help change the culture, because when you sit down with people for 11 weeks in a row and have dinner, you become really good friends. You really get to know them, and you literally fall in love with these perfect strangers, and it changes everything. And, Father James, you often used to say, because we have our Alpha in the basement, and then our nave is upstairs where we celebrate Mass, and you'd often say, I hope what you're doing downstairs transforms what you do upstairs. And so that culture of invitation, hospitality, and Alpha is such a great interface with the unchurched.
I mean, I remember in the early years when I started to use Alpha in my churches, that always struck me because, when you come to the Alpha, if we do it well, there's incredible hospitality, welcoming. It's non-judgmental. We're just loving on people. There's great meal. There's great conversation, a relevant talk that really speaks to you, good music. And it's like, wow. I mean, that if that's your introduction to the Christian faith, you're thinking, wow, I mean, incredible hospitality, great relevant message, great music,
my kind of
non-judgmental. I gotta go on Sunday morning, and you walk in and you get grumpy ushers. No one looks at you. You get people saying you're in my pew. The music is terrible. The homily is not really relevant. So we've got to be careful. Like, can we bridge that divide? And I think what we experienced the more we did Alpha, and it was, those values were absorbed by the people.
Yes.
Eventually, after a couple of years, Sunday morning began to feel like an Alpha night.
Well, let's talk about that a bit, Melanie, because what I picked up on when you were sharing just your example story was you got what we would call a bunch of unchurched, so people who aren't currently connected or attending a church. You've got a bunch of unchurched people to be your mystery guests. Why are you choosing them? And do they? It must be a fascinating experience for them, right? To both be recruited into your team and then to find themselves as an unchurched person attending a Catholic Mass of all things.
The reason that I wanted to use those folks is because those are the very people we're trying to reach, right? You're not trying to reach me, and I'm not trying to reach you. But we are trying to reach those people that are not connected anywhere. So who better to hear from and learn from than, again, the very people we're trying to reach? So to me, they were like our perfect sampling to understand what somebody's thoughts and perceptions are when they visit a church for the first time. So that's my goal in using those folks. Was there a second part of your question?
I'm just curious about what you must, with as many thousands of people as you've sent out, you must have had at this point some interesting stories come back from these unchurched people attending churches, right?
Oh yes, tons. There's we create a little like best worst list of internally just to kind of celebrate and chuckle over things. But some of the things that we've heard, of course, the sad stuff is people walking in and not feeling welcome at all or being spoken to. Things like when somebody walks into church and they do see a first time guest for the first time and they're not sure how to approach them. So sometimes they overwhelm them or they get really awkward and say things like, "Are you here, to visit the clothing closet? Do you need something?" They're not expecting this.
Please tell me that's never actually happened.
Oh no, it's happened. For sure, it's happened. Being ignored, obviously, that's a big one that we see a ton of. But we also see where people walk in and they are welcomed in a way that, like you described with Alpha. I mean, a good coffee and friendly conversation, and it's comfortable. It's non-judgmental. I was sharing with some folks recently. One of the stories that really touched me recently is we had a single mom of 2 kids visit a church for us in Minnesota, and she does not regularly attend church. In fact, she's not even sure if she believes in God. And she shared, based on her experience, she said it was the most welcoming experience she had ever had in a church. And she also went on to say, she said, and it's noteworthy to tell you that my my kids are 13 years of age, and they've never stepped foot in a church in their entire life. And the person I was talking to about that, I said, it made me kind of sit back and think about that for a minute. And I said, we have to remember that there are actually people that have never stepped foot in a church for a wedding, a funeral, a service, any of that. And I was just, we make that assumption everybody's had some sort of experiences, but the truth is there are plenty of people, especially that younger generation, that has not been raised in the church. We can't assume that they've had that kind of exposure. So that was, awesome. One of my other favorite stories is we had a couple when we first started doing this that visited about a dozen different churches for us that we were working with. And they had kids and they visited all of them. And the very last church that they visited for us, they liked so much and felt so welcome that was the church they decided they wanted to keep going to. And eventually the husband felt a call into ministry about 3-4 months into it. And the pastor of that church ended up mentoring that dad, and he went into seminary. And after he graduated seminary, he's now pastoring a church in Lawrence, Kansas. So I just, all from being unchurched, not going to now he's a pastor. I just love that. And is that the goal of this? I mean, in a way, yes, absolutely it is.
Yeah, surrender.
It's the whole goal of why we do this. Somebody asked me, they're like, do you tell your mystery guests that you want them to find a church? I'm like, no, I don't tell them that, because if they thought that we were doing this to trick them into going to church, they probably would not want to do this. I said, so we want them to feel safe and comfortable to do it. But yeah, that was a real joy to celebrate.
I'm really curious about, well, where do you, if you've worked with all these thousands of churches, and in one case you sent 16 people to one place, that's a lot of mystery guests. And where do you find them? You advertise in the newspaper, on Twitter? Like, how does that happen? How do you find them?
So, I mean, all over the place, that we do online campaigns, things like that. But that's when we work with a church, that's about the average number of mystery guests we send into each church we work with. Because
3 months too.
What we're wanting to do is glean common themes. I don't want to know just what one person experienced. I want to know, if I send a dozen people to your church, what's the common themes out of that? What are the strengths? Where are the blind spots? One person only tells us whether they liked it or didn't like it, but a dozen people going, we're going to be able to see if the majority of people that visit feel friendly. And the reason we do it over a period of time is because I want to know, what is it like at each of your masses from week to week, over a period, not just on one Sunday. So that tells us things like, was the 8 o'clock mass as welcoming as the 11 o'clock mass? Because sometimes at a church there is a mass. I'll tell you that church I shared with you, with the 16 people we sent, there were a handful of people that did feel somewhat welcome when they came, and it happened at one service only, and it really was because of the culture of the people that went to that service. It was smaller. They were more relational and friendly, and actually made it a point to reach out to people a little bit at the beginning of service. So yeah, definitely.
I think that's really an important point. We certainly found that out at St. Benedict Parish a number of years ago when we worked with Gallup and did the engagement survey, and we were actually able to kind of maybe break into the data a little bit and get measurements according to the different masses. Now, this is not just looking at the weekend, of course, but the overall sense of engagement with the church. But we saw what came forth was there are very different cultures at each of these different times. In fact, you effectively have 4 different worshiping communities in the same building, and each of them with their own struggles, with their own strengths and their own weaknesses. So that's great.
Because of the nature of our role at Divine Renovation, I do get to visit a number of churches, and I also try to make an effort to experience different church communities, just so I can walk through the doors, feel that awkwardness, but also experience what works and what doesn't. But I have nowhere near the sample size that you and your organization has. Nowhere near. So help me understand, what are some of the results that you're consistently seeing from your mystery guests traveling around?
let's talk to you collectively, like some of the common themes about why people are willing to return to a church. So the top 3 reasons that people will return for an initial visit, and it's important to give you that distinction, because just because somebody will come back a second time does not mean they're going to continue coming back. And so I'm always careful when I talk to churches about that, is like to get somebody to return, the 3 things they need to experience is one. And I know this, this is statistically significant because we ask a question in our survey that our mystery guests fill out. It's called an importance factor question. And we ask them based on everything you've experienced at the church today, from the street to the seat, to follow up, even if somebody voluntarily chooses to leave their information, something along those lines. So all of that, whether it's the signage, the parking, how being welcomed during the mass, whatever they experience, what mattered most to you when you're thinking about returning for an initial visit. And consistently, the top 3 things that we see that are ranking the highest are the friendliness of the church. So to feel like the people are friendly, and not just pastors or people designated to do so, but as you said, the culture. You expect that a pastor or maybe a greeter is going to say hello to you. I always tell churches, they're like, well, we have greeters, and I'm like, well, having a greeter doesn't make you special. Okay. You don't stand apart from any, you don't stand out from any, most churches have greeters and most businesses will greet you when you walk in. So that doesn't really, it's important, but it's not a distinction. What we have found is that friendliness really is found in when folks are greeted by the people that didn't have to greet them. Like, Ron, you told the story about somebody got up, just one of the parishioners got up and said, hey, I don't think we've met before. I'm so, is this your first time here? They took an interest. And so that's the thing that really stands out in friendliness. The other 2 are that are important to people are what they hear, the message, right? The homily. And the speaker, the pastor, whoever is speaking and delivering it, they want to have sort of a feeling like they're comfortable with that person. Not that they know everything about them, but they have, how it is where you kind of, how do you feel good about this person? Do they seem like they're okay? That kind of thing. Are they a good speaker, a good communicator? I mean, it's really important. Nobody wants to come back to a church that's mediocre. They can spend their hour to 2 hours doing anything on a Sunday. And unfortunately, we're competing with that, right? We're competing with, Starbucks and football and time with family and all those things. So message, pastor, speaker, the welcome, very important. And then in the opposite direction, the reasons that people won't return, obviously, is when they don't feel welcome at a church, to a mediocre experience, meaning they sat through an hour of meh. Just they didn't understand it. They didn't connect to it. And, there was nothing inspiring to them. And then also there's actually four things we see a lot, but I just mentioned the first 2, but the last 2 are, if they've got kids, they come to a church that doesn't have very many kids or families, that is not, even if the church is welcoming, friendly, and they might have liked the homily, at the end of the day, there is a desire to go where people are that have other families, because they want their kids to grow up and, peer to peer. I mean, they want to do life with people that are like them. And so that's another reason that we see, and that's a hard one for churches to overcome, because all the churches we work with want families. They want to be reaching more families, and many of them are losing them left and right. And so that's a big reason for not returning. And then the last one is lack of any way to grow in your faith beyond Mass. That's another important thing for people. You talked about Alpha. Alpha is can be a great starting point, but people eventually become more hungry for things beyond just what they're experiencing in Alpha or Mass. They want to go deeper in their faith. And when a church doesn't have any way to build community and to grow together in faith, they look for that and desire that and go other places for that.
Build community and grow together in faith. That's so true. Yeah. Right? It's not just an information dump. It's build community and grow together in faith, doing life with others that are like you. It's so critical. I love it. I have a question for you. A lot of times when we're coaching into churches around the world, there are, in our Catholic tradition, sometimes there can be an entire body of immigrants from a particular country that almost take over a Mass, and so they'll have it in their language. And so you'll have an English Mass and a Spanish Mass, or a Portuguese Mass, or a Polish Mass. And so you have subcultures within a church. Have you ever done any work with churches like that?
Yes, we have. We've been hired. If you mean like have we been hired by maybe a church who has an outreach in particular to Hispanic group or an African American group or Portuguese or something like that? Yes, we have. Where they've wanted to see if they're welcoming and reaching people as well. As far as it being mixed, like if it's a bilingual mass or something along those lines. We try to send in Mr. Guests that are bilingual so that they can understand it. But I can tell you, I'm not bilingual. I've been to some of the bilingual masses and struggled. I already didn't know what was going on. And then I really didn't know what was going on.
No, I'm talking more for the, not necessarily bilingual, but different cultures would have different mass times within the same church. Because I know a lot of pastors and their leadership teams struggle with connecting and try to create a culture that would be similar in its passion and outreach and stuff. And I just wondered what types of things you're seeing there and what kind of advice you give to those leaders.
Well, I would say that diversity is important to a lot of people, especially that younger generation. Yes, do they want to go where there are people their age, but they also want to go to a church and be a part of a church that reflects the community. So if those folks are living in the area, they want to be a part of a church that has that type of congregational makeup, if you will. But as far as, I guess, as far as advice, what would I say to churches like that? It's complex, it's difficult, but being welcoming is ground zero. For no matter what your culture is, no matter what your congregation, your parish is made up of.
Melanie, you're working with churches from different traditions, and I'd just be curious if you see any trends that are perhaps uniquely Catholic, or you see something more common in the Catholic churches you work with versus the Protestant churches. Are you seeing differences and distinctions? And if so, what are they?
It's certainly more prevalent, the two things I mentioned, not feeling welcome and not understanding what's happening in the Mass. That is much more prevalent in the Catholic Church. The Protestant Church, they've done a lot of work in that area. Plus, a lot of what they do is more easy to understand than there's, Catholic faith is so rich in tradition, and there's so many things and a lot of insider stuff that people just simply don't understand. And so when it comes to not returning to the Catholic Church, it almost always boils down to those two things. Are there some people, that have issues with theology? Absolutely. For those that get past, the welcome and all of that, sometimes it comes down to theology. But our mystery guest program, that's one of the things that we're not really about. When we send mystery guests in, what we tell them is, you're not here to measure theology. Yeah. What you're here, you may not agree with maybe the faith, but what this church wants to know is, do they even make you feel welcome to explore it? That's what they're trying to learn. So our mystery guest program is more about hospitality, but absolutely, I would say with complete confidence that not feeling welcome and not understanding what's happening in the Mass are the top two reasons for the Catholic faith.
So for pastors or parish priests who've been listening and they're thinking, oh man, I'd love to know what the experience is for unchurched people walking through my door, the ones that might be inclined to connect with you. What would their experience be of dealing with you and faith perceptions? Like, what do you get at the end? So if I've brought you and your team in, Melanie, and you've sent 16 people and they've said all sorts of things, good and bad, about my church, how do you communicate to that? What's my experience as the priest?
So if that's something that a church is interested in doing, basically it would be to have a discovery meeting, and that depending on where the church is located, that usually takes place WebEx or on the phone, what they're looking for, what their goals are in even doing this, and then we decide on a number of first-time guests that they want to have come. And it's kind of a fire and forget process. Once we decide on the number, we'll start sending mystery guests, and usually only the pastor or maybe a few key leaders know that we're doing this because we want to help capture church as usual, right? We do not want everybody knowing. If I know you're coming to dinner, right, I'm cleaning my house and getting it ready. So we do not want the entire church knowing, that you're coming. And so we just want who has to know. And then we will just start sending them. And the pastor doesn't really know what Mass or when, he just knows there's going to be a number of mystery guests coming over a period of time, and we'll send them. And once they come, they come just as a first time guest would come. They figure out where to park, what door to go in, if anybody greets them when they get there. where's the sanctuary at? If I bring kids with me, can I figure out, do kids come with me, or is there a separate, faith formation time for them? How does that all work? And oh boy, we see a lot of confusion around that, I would say too, in the Catholic Mass. It's very insider in terms of trying to figure out, what's available for kids, or what, where kids go. So often, even in the Protestant faith, people, have like a children's message during the Mass or during the Protestant faith. And then, mom sends the kids up and to you be a part of that. And then all of a sudden the kids are exiting out the door with a leader they've never met before. They have no idea how they're going to get them back. They don't even know where they've gone. And so, pride has gone through the roof. And, now everybody that goes there knows where the kids are going. But, Rick Warren did a study. You guys familiar with Rick Warren, Saddleback Church?
Oh, yes.
So Rick Warren did a study, years back, and asking people why they don't go to church. And the top 4 reason listed on that was that they were afraid to leave their kids with strangers. And really, we're strangers. So the more we can make families feel comfortable about what we offer and invite them in to learn about it, so that they do feel comfortable bringing their kids in, the better. So after all of the mystery guests, kind of just back to the process, after all the mystery guests have gone and visited for the first time, they fill out that survey for us. And then once all the surveys are in and all the guests have gone, we aggregate that data, put it into a report, and then we hold a meeting with the church. And that's usually, again, done by phone or WebEx. And if they're local, then it's in person. If they want that, or if they want us to come and deliver it in person, of course, we can do that. And then we deliver the results of the report. We distill it down and say, here are the strengths of the way you guys welcome people. Here are the opportunities. Here's where the blind spots are. And then we collaborate with them from there, if they want, to take next steps to developing a welcoming process. Like we're working with that church with the 16 folks that won't come back. And, again, digging into culture and how do we improve this, not just at the parish, but, this happens to be the second largest parish in their diocese. And they've got more than just a church there. They've got a school there. And they said, we have to have a culture of hospitality at our schools. Amen. Too, our Catholic schools, not just in, the school represents the church too, and vice versa. So it's across the board. And so we're working with them on that and helping them develop a welcoming process, again, from street to seat, all the way to how they follow up with people. A common theme in our research is that a lot of churches, more prevalent in the Protestant church, they ask for people's information, right? So that they can follow up with them later. And I started to see a few years into it that some of our mystery guests liked what they experienced. And so they were voluntarily leaving their information. And then, so I was following up with them to say, did the church ever follow up with you? And more I would find that they weren't. And so I couldn't believe that. And so when we work with a church, yes, first impressions are important, but, farewell impressions are important too. Farewell ministry, we like to call it, or farewell hospitality. People remember the first thing they experience and they remember the last thing they experience. And so, how you connect with people after the service is very, very important. Very important.
Melanie, it's such a blessing just to hear about what you and your organization are up to and the ways that you're helping churches. So for churches that might be listening to this podcast, what are some ways they can connect with you and Faith Perceptions?
Sure. You can go to our website. That's faithperceptions.com. You can also call us if you'd like. That's our number is 573-335-1782. But if you want to learn just more about Faith Perceptions and the work we're doing, the website is a great place to start. And we're available. Feel free to email us. You can get that right off the website as well.
Great. Thank you so much for being with us today, Melanie. And thank you for listening and joining us. And if you haven't yet downloaded the Divine Renovation app, I'm going to encourage you to do so. Hit up the App Store on your phone. It's one of the things that when we were, Ron, you said we were in the UK recently, and a couple of the priests there said, I don't know what a podcast is. And I said, you don't need to know what a podcast is, as long as you know how to download an app. If you download the Divine Renovation app, you'll figure out how to listen to the podcast. So if there's someone in your life that you think might benefit from this kind of information, if you've got a pastor, a priest, a friend who might want to lean into the kinds of conversations that we're having here on the Divine Renovation podcast, encourage them to download the app. And so this is an easy and simple way for them to get connected with these kinds of conversations. So thank you so much for being with us and joining us, and blessings. We look forward to being with you again next week.